Okay, let's go, let's go.
Hey, let's go. Love, relationships, flings, polygamy. Those words carry different meanings to different people. In particular, love evokes an abundance of feelings and sentiments to most people, regardless of whether they've experienced it or not. Because love is essentially a contested idea, whereby it is difficult to have a universal understanding of it due to the different meanings and sentiments attached to it, in today's session, we challenge the norms of love and relationships by discussing the various dimensions to the two ideas. And just again, the two ideas are love and relationships. It is Mel's and my pleasure to have Akan to discuss this topic with us today. Firstly, as an opening, what does love mean to you? And would you consider unrequited love, flings, or even polygamy love? Let's start with Mel and then we'll head to Akan.
Okay, so how do we define love, right? I think now it's very two-dimensional. Like the very typical definition of love is very two-dimensional because when we love someone, we want to spend time with them. We want to spend the rest of our lives with them even. We want to take care of them, make them happy. And when we break up, it hurts, right? That's how we define love. So that is what love is to me. But recently, I found this video online by Charisma Comment. So he talks about how he brings in a different idea of love, right? Which is how love is being not self-centered about where your partner's happiness comes from. So example being, right, if you break up with your girlfriend, it's natural to feel jealous when your girlfriend moves on to have someone else
Absolutely.
in her life. Yeah, but the idea that he brings in is that you shouldn't feel that way if you really love her because you shouldn't be self-centered about where her happiness comes from. So you should be happy for her that she's happy with someone else and with that someone else can bring her happiness the way you could never. So yeah, that's the idea of love for me. And that idea is something that I've been thinking about for a while. I'm not sure if I'm like selfless enough to think that way. Like obviously if I love someone, I want to spend time with them, right?
I think for myself, I think love is more about strong feelings that makes you and your partner feel about you are very special to each other. So I think but I would like to start from the positive side. It's like love can help two of you grow throughout the relationships. You will definitely learn some lessons from your relationships. So I think that's a beneficial of love. But from that, you also learn about the bad side of the love. Sometimes it will bring some jealousy, and sometimes it will bring some bad thoughts about why self-doubt, I would say. And also you will doubt a lot. Sometimes you will lower your self-esteem also in some way. But I think it's a fundamental lesson that we all need to learn as a human being in this society right now, because when you learn to love someone, you be more considerate and you want to make her more happy and help to grow help him or her to grow in that case. So I would say a lot, but for myself I think more love is more self-centered a bit, in a sense that because we need to feel also happy in a relationship also. So, but from what Mel said just now, when you broke up with your girlfriend, you feel a bit jealousy, but the guys say it shouldn't. I think that's a way to make you believe love again. In my point of view. But in my case, I think love is more a bit. I would say love contains some percentage of the self-love, but I think it shouldn't be a huge problem about that, because I think it should be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I completely agree with that. Like for me, I think that love is mostly about feeling happy and like wanting to share that happiness with somebody else. Well, obviously, like because the word love has a lot of strong feelings associated with it, it's obviously not just about simply just being happy, and it's not just about just fun as well. Because when we talk about love, there'll obviously be an element in which it might actually hurt us in certain ways because of like you mentioned, like feelings of like jealousy and lowering our self-esteem as time. Like, love is such a strong sentiment, such a strong word, to the extent that it not only makes us happy, but it can also make us unhappy if things don't go our way. Which is why we're going to bring up like different topics, different dimensions to love, such as like unrequited love, flings, or even polygamy. So at the beginning, I asked you guys, what do you guys feel about unrequited love, flings, or even polygamy? But that's fine. We've answered the question of love in really general terms. So let's head into the specifics right now. So let's start with unrequited love. What do you guys feel about unrequited love? Why do people hold on to unrequited love?
From my opinion, it's more about like you want to contribute as much as you can, but you don't expect any return. In a case that, so it's like you just want to make sure the people you love to be happy, and you can sacrifice all of yourself to it for making that happen. I think this is the very first lesson of everyone's I wouldn't say, okay, I think it might be a lot of people's first lesson in first relationships, because you feel that the person you love is so good that you want to sacrifice yourself to embracing him or her. I'm not sure do you guys have that kind of experience, but I think unrequited love, the intention is in that way, but I wouldn't say it's a true form of love, because from what I say in the beginning, I think love is more a bit self-centered.
Absolutely.
You only learn to love others when you start to learn yourself first. I think that's the way of learning love.
That's true, actually, because I think that unrequited love, like for a lot of people, I would think that based on people I've spoken to, for instance, their first relationships, or I should say their first loves, are often unrequited, in the sense that if we were to look at the generic meaning of like unrequited love, it's mostly of like love that is not being returned. So you love someone very much, but the other person probably doesn't actually reciprocate the feelings, or the other person basically does not give as much as you give to him or her. So in this sense, that I really agree with what Khan has just talked about, how people actually sacrifice themselves in unrequited love. Because I think that when we talk about relationships and love in general, it really involves sacrifice, in the sense that there are lots of things that you'll have to put up with. And in many instances, like the things that you have to put up with because of love and relationships can be hurtful and harmful to yourself. And I think that's when unrequited love is actually a very challenging aspect when we talk about love, because in many instances, when people are blinded by love, for example, they tend to sacrifice themselves. They no longer prioritize themselves, but all they do is that they prioritize the person whom they love. And that is when it becomes very complicated, because when people realize that their love is unrequited, because it's not always that people are able to immediately recognize that their feelings are not being reciprocated. So the problem with that is that it actually really hurts to a certain extent. So what do you guys feel about that? How should people actually move on from the hurt that comes from unrequited love?
Actually, I think this comes in very well with. So recently, we asked our friends for questions about love, right? So we got our friends to send in some questions about this topic, and we got one question that I think ties in very well into this topic of unrequited love, right? So the question is, to what extent can love hurt, and when is it too much hurt to stop trying? So I think hurt comes in when there is unrequited love. So the thing about this, right, I think it's fine that when you like someone and that person doesn't like you back, you're hurt. I think that's fine. But then I think that it's important that you move on, because if you stay in that state for a very long time, right? So for example, if you like this person and it's been 10 years and you're waiting for that person to finally like you back, right? And yes, it might be very selfless and all, but the thing is, when you wait that long, I feel like after a while, because people change, right? So after a while, you become in love with the idea of her or him instead of being in love with him. So it becomes like a very unhealthy cycle where you're in love with the idea, and because that person would have changed after 10 years. So I think that it's fine to like someone who doesn't like you back, but I think it's also important to move on after a while.
Yes, that's a very good point, actually, if I might add just a little bit, because one of the things that we thought of discussing is that, is it worth waiting and trying to make it reciprocal? And that is when you bring up the point that it is all right for us to love somebody who doesn't love us back. But I think that we need to recognize that there is a point in which we have to stop, because if we are just going to wait for a very prolonged period of time, I don't think that's healthy for yourself as well, because you'll be putting in so much effort in order to try to make it become reciprocal. But especially when somebody doesn't return that favor, or I wouldn't say return the favor, but return that feeling, I think that it's kind of like, to a certain extent, as harsh as it might be, it's kind of like you wasting your time, because you can actually invest that sort of feeling, that sort of time that you spend on that particular person to actually someone else who actually appreciates you. So I think that that's very important. So I think that the hurt in the process, it's arguably worth it to a certain extent, but there comes a point in which, if you realize that the other person is basically just not responding in any way that you expect them to, then it's no longer worth it. What do you think, Han? Like, is it worth it to keep on waiting?
I think it's kind of process like you will learn about how would you like to protect yourself, in a sense that because unrequited love actually is very dangerous for your mental, like because you are contributing a lot of things, but sometimes you don't get any return. I think as a human being, we will feel very unbalanced for ourselves, and also like we will feel very, it's kind of like we'll lower down our self-esteem also. We will feel like, oh, our efforts that put it in actually might not be that worth for that person. So it will kind of have a bad effect on your self-esteem. So actually this negative side of unrequited love, what I think about is a very good lesson to let you learn about how do you want to protect yourself from not being too innocent for that, I would say. Like, it's also, there will be some cases about like unrequited love will finally ends well. That is definitely have some probability of that. But I would say most of them, sometimes a lot of people wouldn't appreciate your effort when that he or she doesn't like you or even love you. I think that's a lesson you will need to learn when you're starting to love someone.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually, because I think that was what I was trying to say, but kind of basically just summed up what I had in my mind really well over here, which is that if we try, if we keep on keep on pushing ourselves to actually try to make someone reciprocate that feeling towards us, it is actually very harmful to our mental health. So basically, I think that what we have summed up from this really brief point is that when it comes to unrequited love, like, it is worth it to a certain extent where you can try, because obviously love doesn't just come in a snap. It takes effort. Like you have to be able to basically show somebody, and in order for that person to reciprocate, they need to be wooed to a certain extent. But if you keep on doing that, it raises a lot of questions about self-esteem, because if it fails, for example, and you just keep on going along with it, it would damage your self-esteem in the sense that you'll ask that question, are you good enough? Which is one of the questions that we covered in our previous podcast sessions, because are you good enough? So that is one of the things that will always come up when it comes to unrequited love. So obviously, it's going to be up to people to decide for themselves, is the hurt in the process worth it? But I think that what's most important is that when to stop. And obviously, there is no specific answer to that. It actually depends on the individual themselves to decide for themselves when is it to stop. But the moment you end up feeling a constant process of hurt and unhappiness because of unrequited love, I think that we can agree that is when you should stop and try to move on. Like, you've given it your all, it's time to move on and try it with somebody else. What do you guys think about that?
I think because, like, since we are discussing about, actually I think all of our point discussing right now, we are assuming that all of the human beings are very rational. So when we all know that, we are kind of saying that when we all know that I'm starting giving an unrequited love, so we should stop now. But actually, sometimes I feel that love is not working that way. So sometimes we, even though we are doing unrequited love at the moment, but we're still going on to do that. So I think in this case, like what I mentioned just now, is a very good lesson to let you know when you should stop. So it's corresponding to what's the Q&A from our friends. It's really hard to quantify or like specialize which kind of the incidents that happen then you should stop. I think because it's different from every one of us. In this case, I think from this unrequited love lesson, we will definitely know that's when you should stop, because that's the point whereby you know you're hurting yourself. So like what I said just now, a really good lesson for all of us should learn in a relationship.
Exactly, yes. I think that this is unrequited love is actually a very, very difficult topic to actually discuss in a sort of like rational way, or I should say in an objective way, because it's obviously up to an individual to decide for themselves when they should move on and all that. And it's actually very difficult for us to actually give examples of that if we do not have a specific example as to how and what is the instance in which somebody needs to move on. So I think that we should now move on to something that we can discuss more objectively, something that actually there are facts on the ground that we can actually talk about with regard to like cultures, the culture of love, the language of love, for example. So let's move on to monogamy versus polygamy. Let's start with Mel. Like, what do you think about monogamy and polygamy? Like, is there a sort of like different dimension to love with regard to the different sort of like relationship structure in those two, between those two?
Yeah, so my thoughts on polygamous relationships, right? So would I personally get into one? Like, no, I don't think so. But it's only because of the culture and how we were brought up, right? So around us, we don't know a lot of people who have been in polygamous relationships, which is why that I think it's ingrained into us that, you should only love one person. But do I think that polygamous relationships are love? Like, absolutely, I think so. Because I think love is very subjective and people express it and experience it very differently. And I think the way that these people who involve themselves in polygamous relationships, right, what their mindset is, I think is that they think that love isn't a finite resource. So you can love someone at 100%, right? But that doesn't mean when you bring in two other people, so when you love three people, that doesn't mean that you're cutting down that 100% and you're loving them like doesn't mean that the amount of love that you give a single person decreases, because you can love three different people at 100% each. So yeah, so that is what I think people think, and I think it's absolutely true, because like, for example, if like I have one sister, right, and Khan has two sisters, and that doesn't mean that I love my sister more than Khan loves his sister just because he has two of them, right? So I think that is I think that's what people in polygamous relationships think. But I think what is limited that we have is time, right? So as long as you don't equate love to time, then I think it's fine, because time, like, you don't have infinite amount of time. You can only spend a certain amount of time, especially if you love three people, you have to divide up your time to three people. So as long as you're fine and you know that he loves me, but that doesn't mean that he has to spend a lot of time with me, then I think polygamous relationship is fine.
So I think that what Khan has said is actually, what Mel has said is actually a very good point, because monogamy or any sort of like marriage construct or relationship construct, all of it is a social construct. So because in terms of marriage or having a partner, these things have evolved over time, in the sense that there was a time in which polygamous relationships was the norm, and this changed towards monogamy. So why do we think that monogamy is the norm? Why do we have that impression that it's only possible to love one person at one time? Or why do we think that it is odd that somebody could end up loving up to three people at one time? It's because of how it's because of what we've been exposed to, basically. We've been ingrained in this idea that monogamy is the norm, that you can only love one person at a time. And I think that Mel brings up a very good point in what she's basically said, because you cannot just divide love in terms of, I don't know, like percentages or something like that, because you can give your 100% to everybody. But let's talk about the ethics of it then, because obviously, why do some people not accept polygamous relationships? It's probably because they feel that it is not fair to basically share your love, to divide your love. So let's ask Mel and move on to Khan after this. Do you think that is it feasible to actually be committed to more than one person at one time? Is it actually possible to divide 100%? Like, I know that Mel has said that it is, but what do you think about the receiving partner, for instance? Would she be all right with sharing her partner? What do you think?
I think it really depends. Like, again, I said, like, love is very subjective, right? So it depends on how each of the person. So if like there's a family and there's one guy and 3 girls, I think it's fine if 4 of them reach a consensus that it is okay. Then I think they can move on. And I think this again ties in quite well into another question that we got from our friends, right? So the question is, how would you quantify love if you're able to? So I think that love, okay, first of all, I think that love shouldn't be quantified, because when we quantify things, we measure things, and when we measure things, it is to compare, right? And I think love is something that shouldn't be compared because it is so subjective. But if you had to quantify love, I think this ties in quite well into love languages. So I'm not sure if you guys have tried out the quiz before. So there's a quiz online about love languages. So that's like, there's I think quality time, acts of services, I forgot the rest, but basically it's like people express love differently. So if let's say, for example, if I am an acts of services person, right, I would quantify love in a way that I want to see my partner's helping me. So like, how often does he help me with my work or with like cleaning the house or something? So I think it really depends on how the person is. Okay, I've deviated quite a bit from polygamous relationship. Yeah, Khan, what do you think?
Okay, so let's start from the polygamy relationship first. I think I watched a video before. It's American YouTube channel, but in that case, there are a lot of people discussing about the pen relationship, which means like a girl has been dated with 3 different guys, and all of them know they are in this pen relationships. I think it's somehow kind of similar to the polygamy, in a sense that everyone is okay with these relationships, but as for us, I would say, as for us as Asian, we are so used to like monogamy, in a sense that because when we are young, we always to talk about like, oh, a guy should only marry a girl, like a guy, you only can find one partner in your life. I think there's kind of like the culture differences that makes us think about monogamy actually is the true form of love in our Asian country, I would say. Then, however, actually in different country or different culture, they are accepting the polygamy because they all think that love is just love, so we don't try to overcomplicate it. Then, in a sense that, for my opinion, I don't accept polygamy for myself, but if others like happy with their polygamy relationship, then I think it's okay for them, because since they are all happy for that, they don't have any arguments for each other, both of their 3-4 partners are okay with that, then I think that should be fine for them.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it's more of like getting an agreement with everybody, because if you enter a polygamous relationship, for example, there would be the possibility that obviously you'll have lesser time for your initial partner, for instance. So I think that what matters most is that polygamous relationships are entered into only with the consent of the other partner. Meaning to say that the other partner basically agrees to it, which I think that, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, that is sort of like the structure that exists in Malaysia right now with regard to polygamous relationships, whereby consent is needed from the initial partner. So, but this raises the point of like the feasibility of it, because I think that all of us can establish the fact that, you know, whilst we might have a personal preference towards either, say, monogamy, for instance, we don't necessarily feel that polygamy is not love. I think that we have established that it is love, because everybody defines love very different today. But do you think that it is feasible, though, in the sense that, do you think that there will be implications on the family? For example, like if a man, for instance, has like several families, do you think that might be a problem in a sense that would it be like, for instance, his ability to actually provide love for even, say, his children, for example, in the different families? Would that be a problem in your opinion, either one of you?
Okay, I personally think that wouldn't be a problem as long as they are all financially stable to support each other. I'm not saying that the guy has to support his 5 different wives and 5 different families, because I think that these days a lot of women work as well, and they in terms of the financial side.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the non-financial side, I think there should be no problem. Again, as long as people are okay with it. And I mean, what's wrong with having like a bigger family, right? Maybe there will be complications when there's children. Maybe like stepsons or stepdaughters. I don't know, because I haven't been in such a family before.
Absolutely.
But yeah, maybe there will be like some identity issue. I'm not sure, but I think it's fine as long as everyone is okay with it.
Yeah, I think that the main point that I was trying to raise on this is basically because at the initial stages we talked about, for instance, how love does have its negative aspects, in which it's not just all about happiness. Not everything is plain sailing. So what I was implying is that, do you think that a problem of, say, jealousy, not just among spouses, for instance, not just among partners, but also among children, like do you think that jealousy would actually be more of a bigger issue? Because I think that even in monogamous families, for example, like there are things of like sibling rivalries through jealousy and all that. Or even for instance, the spouse might feel like as if his or her husband or wife is not giving him or her as much time as they would want. Do you think that this aspect of jealousy would even be more pertinent in polygamous relationships?
I think it will somehow try to exaggerate this kind of the jealousy in the polygamy relationships, but I think that's the cause of it. For let you like stepping into the polygamy relationship, like when you step in this kind of relationship, you should expect this kind of thing will happen, because your partner wouldn't have most of his time to you already. So what I think about, like, if the people who accepting polygamy relationships wouldn't have this kind of worry, because if they did, initially they wouldn't choose to be in this kind of relationship already.
True.
All right, so I think that we've actually discussed monogamy and polygamy in a very in-depth way, in the sense that I think that we can establish the fact that we do agree that polygamous relationships are love as well, just as much as monogamous relationships, because relationships are a social construct, in the sense that there was a point in time in which polygamy was the norm, and now it's actually less prevalent because it's even illegal in some countries, or illegal to certain groups in certain countries. But I think that what we have already established is that it is possible to love more than one person at one time, but there might be certain problems that come with it in terms of, say, jealousy and the impact upon, say, the family, for example. And because we've actually talked about the family just now, and I think that by talking about monogamous relationships or polygamous relationships, we've actually focused a lot on marriage, for example, because that is when people actually talk about marriage. Is a polygamous relationship actually workable for marriages? So let's bring in a different dimension of love now, to something that's more contentious, something that's not too positive, or something that people wouldn't necessarily interpret as the happy side of love. Let's talk about divorce and love. So as a very general question, do you think that love is still possible in a divorced relationship? Do you think divorcees can still love each other? Let's start with Mel.
Okay, so the idea that I want to bring in right now, right? I think love and marriage, or even love and relationships, is two separate things. So my answer would be yes. I feel like yes, you can still love someone even though you're divorced. And reason being, I have, obviously all 3 of us have never gotten married or gotten divorced. So like this is from a perspective of someone who's a student, So So I think that marriage doesn't equals to love, because when we get married to someone, when we get into a relationship with someone, we enter this relationship knowing that this person can take care of us, knowing that we can live with this person in the long run. So either our values are aligned, or you like their attitude, they can take care of us, and you trust the person, you're compatible. So this is what I think marriages and relationships are, with comparison to love, right? Love, I think, is unconditional. It doesn't take into account all these things. So actually, I just came across this song. I don't know if you guys heard of this song before. So it's called "If the World Was Ending" by JP, Sax, and Julia or something. So I think I really resonated with the lyrics of this song, because so to sum it up, right, this song is about an earthquake and a couple who has broken up but still love each other. So basically, the song is about the song is saying that we know that we are not meant to be together, but if the world was ending, can we spend time together and can we be in love again? Which brings me to a point, right? I think the person that we are dating right now might not be the person that we love the most. So I might love person A more than I love person B right now at this point. But I'm in a relationship with person B because I can foresee myself living with person B in the long run. And over time, that converts into being comfortable and dependent with this person, and that's why we get married. So and then we see this as love, but I don't think so. I don't know, like, what do you guys think? So I feel like marriage isn't just about love. I feel like we date for the future, because when we get into a relationship, we think about our future, how this person is gonna take care of my family and stuff. So yeah, what do you guys think?
Well, I think that that's a very good point, because I think that it's important to state that marriage is not equivalent to love, because the reason as to why we always think that marriage is the most stable form of like long-term relationship is because whenever we talk about relationship, at least in our society, if you are in a long-term relationship, there's always an expectation that that long-term relationship would become marriage. It often leads to marriage. In fact, I think that that is the thing that, when we go back for, say, Chinese New Year or whatever festive season, or when we visit family members, they tend to ask us, that, are you in a relationship? Like, if yes, like, when are you going to get married? I mean, like, that is the question that's always being asked a lot of people, but to a lot of people, and a lot of people get irritated by it, because there's always this conception in society that if you are in a relationship, it has to lead towards marriage. I think that is actually, in my opinion, so in my opinion, I think that yes, love is an aspect of marriage, but that love does not necessarily have to lead to marriage, because in many European societies, many Western societies, for instance, there are people who never get married, but who have families, for example. They have been in a long-term relationship for decades, but they just never officially tied a knot in paper, but that is still love. But I think that, that is actually really, it's actually a misconception to basically associate relationships, a long-term relationship, with marriage, because it doesn't necessarily have to head towards that direction, I think, because it obviously is a social construct. So obviously, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that marriage does not involve love. It definitely has to. But we also have to remember the fact that in many instances, marriages do not have love in some instances. For instance, it could be a planned marriage, for example. It used to be a thing in the past whereby two people don't actually know each other, but they get married. They don't love each other yet, but they start to love each other from the basis of the marriage. So I think that it's actually a misconception to think that love has to lead to marriage, or marriage stems from love all the time. What do you think, Khan?
Okay, so what I think about from back to the point whereby you're saying that a lot of European countries, there are a lot of people that have relationships and they have family, but that didn't get into the marriage, because all of us know that actually marriage involves in a responsibility as well. So a lot of people in that way that think that their relationship should not be tied with other things. As Asian, a lot of us think that relationship should end with marriage because we want to be responsible to our partner. That's always our final goal as a relationship. But
Absolutely.
in that case, actually, we kind of like mix up the main goal of the intention of getting marriage. Is just like we want to get into a long run relationship with
Mhm.
our partner. But so that's why, back to the question, is like, after divorce, do we still have a relationship? I think yes, because getting into marriage, we also need to uh kind of like get used to the each other,
Exactly. Yeah.
because you need to living with that person. So
Mhm.
sometimes marriage, a divorce is just a symbol that's about like you guys are not suitable for each other in living habit, in terms of living habit, or in terms of like financial or something
Absolutely.
else. In that case, I think getting a divorce is better for two of your relationships, but I wouldn't say after a divorce you won't have any love towards each other anymore.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point that I was having at the back of my head, which is that when it comes to marriages and then divorce, I think that it's actually the point that's actually very clear is that love never just disappears. I think because, for example, I think that divorced couples can still care for each other because the problem is that um, you can still care for each other while no longer being in a long-term relationship or no longer being in a committed relationship, because I think that very often divorce happens not because people just no longer love each other, but I think that they realize that they're no longer compatible with each other, or it's sort of like they're no longer able to live with each other anymore. They've realized that they just cannot live with each other. It's not because they don't love each other, but they just can't spend their lives with each other anymore. So I think that we've actually established the fact that divorce and love is possible, and I think that it's obviously really flawed in order to think that long-term relationships have to lead towards marriage, and that in marriage, if the marriage breaks down through divorce, love no longer works. I think that that's actually absolutely wrong, because I think that it's very clear that love doesn't just disappear, especially if you guys have spent a lot of time with each other and all that. So I think that we'll have to move towards, due to time constraints, I think we'll have to move towards very quickly into loving someone versus needing someone. So I think that is actually inextricably linked to what we talked about just now, about marriage. I think that, so is marriage about loving someone, or is it about needing someone, or is it about both of it? Either one of you.
I think it's about both. So, like I think like what I said just now, right? Loving someone, like when we talk about marriage, I think it consists of both loving someone and needing someone, also being compatible with that person. And I think it does come hand in hand. And especially like when you're already in a family, it's hard to see your life without your partner because you've been together for
Mhm.
so long, you know. So yeah.
What about you, Kan? What do you think?
I think I agree with Mel. It's like when getting in marriage, actually you not only loving someone, but you also need someone, because it's a huge commitment to all of us. So you will take a big step forward in your relationship to do so.
Also, I think like when it comes to marriage and family, I think it goes a lot deeper than the feelings that you have for your partner, because especially when you have children, right? I think the thing that's keeping you together with your partner is also a lot of commitment,
Yeah.
because if you get a divorce, right,
Mhm.
you would affect the lives of your children, and you wouldn't want to do that. So I think when it comes to marriage, there are so many other things that comes into play, and it's not just feelings anymore, but it's like you sort of have to be with each other to have a nurturing environment for your children. So I think when you start to have children with this person, it goes a lot deeper than just love and just needing someone. Yeah.
That's true. I think that essentially, basically, I think that when it comes to marriages, for instance, marriage, it is about loving someone and needing someone. But in terms of marriage versus normal relationships, like the love is a different dimension in which, when it comes to marriage in certain instances, especially when there's children involved, you can't just break the love basically by just cutting someone else off, because you do need your partner in a certain regard. For instance, some people feel that they still need their partner for the sake of their children, for example. They don't want their kids to suffer. So when it comes to the relationship aspect of marriages, I think that it's not just all about happiness, or I should say passion or desires. It's no longer about that, but it's more of like having that constant, like, needing to keep the relationship intact because of other reasons. So that makes letting go rather difficult to a certain extent. Because, I mean, in normal relationship, when it comes to just like love, a normal relationship that does not involve marriage, for example, I think that letting go is difficult, but perhaps it is easier in a sense that it's just between two people or three or four people, whatever it is. But when it comes to marriage, for instance, letting go actually means breaking down the sort of life that you've built. And I think that becomes more difficult. So I think that in terms of like holding on, for example, which is what we've brought up much earlier on, I think that holding on is perhaps something that a lot of people do when it comes to marriages because they want to maintain that constant in their lives, I think. So, I think they've established the fact that there are a lot of consequences, and the dimension totally changes when the family is involved, especially when there's children. So what about the Q&As that we have on Instagram just now? Have we covered those questions yet?
Yeah, I think we have. We've covered 2 questions just now, and we have 2 more. So one of it is, how would you deal with insecurities in a relationship? So maybe Khan, would you want to share how you deal with it?
I think I deal with because I feel like the insecurity actually comes from like you not really loving yourself enough, in a sense that you have not really strong confidence towards yourself.
Absolutely.
What I think about in this case, you are not really ready to get in a relationship, but we wouldn't deny that a lot of people they have lower self-esteem. So in that case, when they have insecurities, the first things I would like to recommend is that you try to comfort yourself first, if possible, because sometimes you need to try to handle the situation by yourself. It's beneficial for your partner also to let him less responsibility in a sense. But when you can't really deal with the insecurity by yourself, you should seek help from your partner, because a relationship is not about just you, but with your partner also. This deals is not about yourself, but also with your partners. Although it sounds a bit unfair, but I guess that's how the relationship works. So both of you need to do some actions to really solve these problems to a longer run for your relationships.
Okay, I think dealing with insecurities, right? I think being in love and being committed to someone is a very vulnerable thing where your partner gets to see the ugliest parts of you. So I think it goes back into self-love, right? This is why people say that you can't love other people if you can't love yourself first. But I think what Khan said is also true. So like being vulnerable with someone, opening up to someone, I think it's actually a very beautiful thing, and that is what relationships are about actually. Yeah, and maybe we can move on to our last question. So the question is, do you prefer to love or do you prefer to be loved?
I think for myself, I know that at first, like before when I was younger, I prefer to be loved, because I kind of like very scared to giving out, because I think it might make me to more vulnerable. But through the whole growing up sessions, I feel that actually to love someone is the strongest force that you will able to give as a human being, and sometimes it's quite easy to take it back also. You have the rights to take it back in that kind of relationship, if you get what I mean. Like I don't know, maybe this is my own opinion, but I feel somehow that the person who giving love actually is stronger than the person who receives love, because he or she has the rights to stop these actions to do so.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, that kind of like leads us back to like the point that we were talking about just now in the previous question, which is dealing with insecurities. I think that having both in a relationship and individually, I think is very important in the sense that, for example, when you love somebody, when you're giving your love, for instance, you're actually like helping that person to overcome his or her insecurities, I think. And when it comes to being loved, it actually is like somebody else helping you overcome your insecurities as well. So I think that it's basically a two-way street. I think that in a relationship and for individual well-being, you need both of it, I guess, because, for example, you can't just be helping somebody and not receiving anything, and you cannot just be receiving without giving up some as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think to wrap it up, Like, of
Mhm.
course, everyone wants to be loved, right? But I think having the feeling of loving someone is also something that is very beautiful, and I think that everyone would like to have that feeling, because
Absolutely.
like putting someone above or at least in line with your own needs is, and
Mhm.
knowing that they feel the same about you is quite like, it's quite a feeling that everyone loves. And this is why I think love is so romanticized in movies and songs and everything. So yeah, so we've come to the end of this episode. So usually at the end of this episode, at the end of every episode, we end it with some takeaway messages. But I think for this topic in particular, I think love is a very subjective thing. So, you know, you do what you want, do whatever floats your boat. So yeah, so thank you, Khan, for joining us for this episode.
Thank
We
you for
hope
joining
that
us.
yeah,
Thank
we
you
hope
for
that you
having
have
me.
fun, and we hope
Yep.
to see you in our next episodes as well.
And to all our viewers who might be studying for their exams and assignments, I wish you all the very best and thanks for tuning in.